to be honest with you, I don't have many connections down in the Houston area to meet the good people down there working with the kids, as you mentioned, at all levels, grassroots all the way through the elite level that you're working. So it was nice to reconnect and to meet some new people, and maybe some of those people are here on call as well. I see we've got a good crew. Yeah, so I don't want to go much into me. I just want to say that, and I always preface that anything that I want to share with you today is not about absolutes. It's not about truth versus incorrectness. It's not about Todd Beane. It's not about TOVO. It's about ideas, generating ideas. I always say I'm gonna unapologetically present, how we view talent development, understanding that it would be dreadful if the entire world would either agree with me or follow that lead, because football has many flavors and many interpretations and many ways to go about developing and nurturing wonderful young men and women on the pitch and off the pitch. So Paul and I are much like that. We have conversations. I know he's very much into chess. We talk about all of the moving pieces within the field, but beyond the field as well. And each of you will have your own upbringing, your own flavor of football. It's probably ingrained in you for a while by a coach that you played for, by a culture that you come from, or by a style of play that you aspire to. And that's the beauty of football. So I always say that at the beginning, that under no circumstances at the end of our session do I want to come across as knowing any more than you do. I just have a few more years under my belt now, and I have to take some time to really clearly define what we believe about youth development. And I have to give credit where credit's due. I've worked with a lot of great colleagues, some of whom would be TOVO-like and some would not. Some of whom with I agree, and some with whom I don't agree about talent development or certain style or brand of football. And all of those pieces come together, I think have helped me hone my craft. So if anything, a little prompting, a little pulling, shoving, a little wrestling questions. I'm from New England, so any questions that you have, you can poke, you can prod, you can call out all the BS, as we say. We're thick-skinned but big-hearted people up in New England, so the winters make us that way. So you're never going to offend me by taking these ideas or concepts head-on and calling me out on any inconsistencies or any things you don't agree with. So all of that's fair game today, which I think is a way we should really work together collaboratively. With that in mind, I'm just going to jump in, and I always start, and we offer programs online and presential here in Sitges or in Houston or UCLA or Berkeley, every place we've been. I always start with this in one shape or form. I'm just going to reduce it to one slide now. But no matter what we talk about, I never want to lose sight of our collective why. And ours at TOVO would probably not be too divorced from your own, which is to promote learning and joy for the children in our charge. We want them to progress, obviously, and we want them to have fun in the game. Some things I've done in the past maybe have flown in the face of that, whether it's getting on a referee or not understanding the full dimension of a youth in the game. We've all made our mistakes, probably maybe violating some of this agenda, but if I can come back to my why on a more regular basis, and collectively we come back to our why, then we can discuss the how and go in different directions, but our platform will always be the same. Why we coach is for whom we coach, and we want our children to learn, and we want our children to enjoy the game so that they stay in the game for as long as possible, or as long as Paul and I have been in, which has been a while now, Paul, if the years keep ticking, right? So I always start with that no matter what we discuss or what we debate, there's no question that everybody on this broadcast shares this agenda. We want the best for our children, and from that departure, only good things come. So what I'll do is spend about 20 minutes just giving you some overview of how we view it. I'm going to focus in at the younger levels, Paul, today. It doesn't mean that it's not applicable to the older ages as we go to 9 aside and 11 aside, but I wanted to focus in on that grassroots, you can't really say elite player at 7, 8, 9, 10. Elite is when you get into Paul's Academy or others, you start to get into professional contracts. Maybe you can consider yourself an elite player. But I don't agree that we have elite 7-year-olds or 8-year-olds. We may have passionate and talented young kids. So I want to focus in on this younger age, around a 7-aside structure. Not that it changes through the years, but just so it makes it simple for today's 20-minute presentation, open it up to your questions, and then it becomes just a debate between colleagues back and forth. So we look at TOVO, we look at the concept of having a dual task as a coach. And you can frame it as you want, but we've just decided to frame it in 2 tasks. On one hand, you have a team organization task. So you've got to create a unified group of capable individuals going out and competing with courage. And that has to be South Texas or driving to Dallas or playing on the other side of town or playing your crosstown rivals or playing internally within an in-house league. You have a team, 4, 7, 9, or 11-a-side team, depending on the age, and you have that team organization task. And that's a critical task to be able to have them compete effectively and as proficiently as possible, win, lose, or draw. But that's not enough at the youth level. You have an individual development task as a coach, and that is to nurture. In our case, we say nurture players of great cognition, competence, and character. So intelligent players, players that are skillful in their competencies and understand the game, and players that demonstrate a character that would be fitting of you, your organization, the team dynamic, and of course the culture with which we play, which is a respectful, ambitious, and dedicated character to the game. So we say cognition, competence, and character. Those are our words. But I think we all agree that we have a task to make sure that each player within that collective improves. And ironically, I think if each player does improve because you have helped them improve, then the team will improve. So it is a process rather than a product. And so keeping those dual tasks in mind, I think this is from Juan Leo, who mentions this quote you can read. I mean, I use this picture I found because it does remind me that if we just look at the game as the sum of its parts, we may not create a holistic being that's capable of playing the game any more than taking the car here in the garage and picking it apart and thinking that each part is going to be representative of the whole. Okay, so I think this is a great quote by Wama about keeping kids in these relationships that are contextual, such that skill and intelligence and character interwoven is going to be exhibited on the field when you have that team organization on display. Okay, so it's just a view that we hold, and it's very, let's say, correspondent to, you know, a Johan Cruyff type of vision, a Barcelona, Ajax type of vision, without going in particulars, because we believe in the holistic development, més que un club, more than a club, more than just a boy or girl that can kick a ball and score goals. Okay, really developing and nurturing human beings first, which was Johan's greatest agenda, and some of them may end up playing in Camp Nou and becoming the best that the game has ever seen. But that's something that is at the end of that process to be celebrated, not at the expense of the children who are in charge, who we offer total development. So as we go into, we asked ourselves a pretty difficult question, and that is, how can we simultaneously develop an individual within that team context? How do we handle those dual tasks so that we're not alternating between one or the other, or at one expense of the other, so that we are actually marrying individual and team development simultaneously at every exercise, in every session that we afford our players? And it wasn't an easy question to deal with, because naturally, like the car, if you break it into parts, it's much easier. Well, I can just work on dribbling today, or I can just work on concept 2 about tactical play, or corner kick Fridays. Right? But we wanted to challenge ourselves as professionals here, and I don't speak just to myself, I'm talking about my colleagues, sitting down and saying, well, if we want to develop a holistic player, how do we train holistically so we're not breaking training into disparate parts? And what we came up with may sound obvious, it may sound foolish, but we came up with a pretty simple concept, I would say, and that is a very unifying concept. What we realized is there is a process, right? There is a unifying concept. Individuals need to find and exploit space. How, we'll talk about in just a moment. But as the umbrella, individuals need to find and exploit space. The team collectively needs to find and exploit space, with the ultimate space obviously being in the back of the net and not in our own net, hopefully fewer times. Okay, So we found that this actually works, and we wrestled with it, we toyed with it, we played with it, and we came to really feel comfortable with it, that individuals need to go out on a pitch and find and exploit space, and the team needs to do the same collectively. So this became our unifying concept around which we would build every session from 7-year-olds to 27-year-olds, okay, or beyond, 30s. I think Johan played till he was 38. We'll see how long Messi makes it over the next few years, okay? So everything we do at TOVO, and this is now where I'm just talking about our view, you can frame football in any way that you prefer, but we framed it as an invasion sport, objective to find and exploit space such that players individually and players collectively can do that greater than their opponents, which would produce a victory. Of course, the game is a competitive game. It's a game to go to win. And then you decide about how you're willing to win and with what players and what circumstance, with what agenda holistically. So with this in mind, we could take the next step. And then I did analysis and I went back to the States. I've been out of the States now for 18 years. I've been back every year on several occasions, but living in Barcelona now for 18 years. And when I went back, I was, I guess, one, inspired because I think there's a lot of great developments in the game, and another a little disappointed because I saw a lot of the same things I saw in the 1980s in the 2017, 18, and 19s, which I thought wasn't as much progress as I would have liked to have seen, okay, to be critical. But with a passion for improving the game in my native country, which is the United States. And one of the things I noticed is, unfortunately, many drills, and that says may, so I apologize for the typo, many drills, not may, many drills build the player's capacity to find, may not build the player's capacity. In other words, there are players, when I would look at training sessions, I would see a player who was off, meaning they were not engaged cognitively. Maybe they were doing some minimal competencies, maybe not testing their character, but they weren't on. And I'll give you an example. If I put kids in a line and they have to go to the end of the line to do whatever you've asked them to do, they're off. The switch is off. They're off. And that's not okay in the team dynamic. You don't want your players to be off every other execution of an act like a training exercise would reinforce. So I started to recognize there are certain drills that reinforce a cognitively faithful process relative to the team organization, which is the weekend match. And there are those that don't. And unfortunately, I saw too many drills that are actually training habits that we would not want to be exhibited during a 45-minute halftime or a 15-minute quarter, depending on the structure of your youth thing. So that alarmed me. It was a red flag, or in this case, a red note. They're off. I don't want my children to be cognitively on, off, on, off. I want them to be cognitively on. And so what we decided to do at TOVO was to ensure that we would throw out any exercises that were allowing players to turn off. And okay, I had a lot of them. I threw away a whole archive of wonderful exercises that are very common. And we only want to reduce our portfolio to exercises that would promote simultaneously the development and the nurturing of cognitive skills, the competencies to play the game, and the character to compete and cooperate. Only those. We call it our 3C checklist. If an exercise did not develop cognition, competence, and character simultaneously, it goes out into the trash bin. So you can imagine about 1,000 drills went in the trash bin, and it kept us with about 30 base exercises that are cognitively developing a child, demanding technical precision, and building the character to compete and cooperate with your teammates, and against, obviously, against the opponents. So that's one thing I noticed in going back and seeing back to Connecticut, back to Seattle, back to California, where I maintain a residence, and seeing that so much of this was still occurring, not being maybe aware of the marriage between cognition, competence, and character. So I had to confront myself. Now I'm not speaking to you, I'm speaking to myself. I grew up in the 80s playing college ball for Bobby Clark. Great man, great leader, national champion coach at Notre Dame. But when he first came over from Scotland, he was at Dartmouth, where I met him and played for him my senior year. Went on to Stanford, then to Notre Dame. Have great admiration for Bobby. We don't agree on football in terms of the flavor of football, right? We played a 4-4-2 Scottish, knock it down in a Hanover, New Hampshire win, and I had to hold it up, and we ran. And I'm a little bit more Cruyffista in the possession based. So I use that example because the conversation I'm having now, the first thing I did was I did all the exercises that I learned in college when I came out of college and was coaching and playing, as I said, chasing Paul around the pitch out west. So I just took the exercises that were, and the rationale was a good one. It's a survivorship bias. Well, I played D1 college, and I was going to play in the, whatever we called it back then, US ISL or US, I'm not sure what it was called, before the big boys went on to the MLS like Paul and others. The elements that I brought were the same elements that were taught to me. Because, hey, if it worked for me, it worked. And that's one of the greatest biases I see. Well, this produced players, and so it should work today. Okay. But then I had a conversation with myself. Well, if I really want to nurture cognition, competence, and character, then I have to listen to this wonderful, now she's passed away, Maya Angelou, great author, philosopher, and feminist, to do better now. So I had to ask myself the tough question, say, do I still want to do just what I did? Or do I want to do what I know now could be potentially better? And so those drills I threw away were difficult to part with. The conversations I had with myself were hard because I'm having a conversation with my changing self. And I had to go forward without beating up my past self, right? So the conversations were really internal. What does that mean? If I innovate, does that mean I was wrong when I was coaching in my 20s? No, of course not. But it can oftentimes, more often not, make us feel like, well, it does undermine what we once did. Particularly if some of you have won the 1994 Houston Cup, then you're probably saying, well, everybody else has to innovate, but hey, I'm a champion, right? Well, we won the state championship in Connecticut in 1982. I doubt we would win it again with the same level of play. So innovation, I knew, had to come internally. And thus I created TOVO, stands for Total Football in Dutch, to honor my father-in-law, Johan, with whom I had a wonderful luxury of working 14 years before his passing. And we created a TOVO training wheel. What would be the mandate? To promote learning and joy, to nurture always players of cognition, competence, and character, and to create a portfolio, a training wheel, if you will, that made sense within that. So I don't want to go into great detail, but it just forced us to be disciplined about what is the relationship between, if you look at the internal, matches and position play exercises, matches and doing rondos or training games, or working with kids individually and the needs that they may have. Well, it was a holistic, so it's a circle by design. It's a circle by design, not a pyramid, not the Cruyff pyramid, for example, or other linear models. Purposely, it's a holistic model. Everything is interwoven. Every tug on one will affect in a profound and positive way, hopefully, the other. So this became our portfolio. The outer band, of course, you'll recognize is just what we call the ticket into high performance. A fantastic mindset, taking care of your nutritional needs, proper behavior, study, and sleep protocols. So we work with children in a residential program here in Sitges, just south of Barcelona. So we're literally taking care of the child 24 hours a day. So we do take care of their nutrition and their sleep protocols. I know that most of you, unless you're in a residence program at an academy, would not. So let me jump in now. And keep in mind, any questions you have, we can come back to them. But so let me give you a sample. What does that mean on a practical basis? I mentioned to Paul, I want to be really practical. So you got a little bit of our why. You got the journey that I went through. You got the influence of Johan Cruyff. You got that reconciliation I had with a brilliant coach and mentor and leader in Bobby Clark, and a new mentor I found in Johan, and both brilliant men, both men worthy of all the accolades that they have received and continue to receive, and yet a reconciliation with what football would resonate with me, and by extension, the players in my charge. So I'll bring this down to a 7 aside. What would that mean? Well, I'm going to take training 1B. So this is a training that we would run first week of training with 9-year-olds, session B, second training of the first week, okay? So you see in the upper left-hand corner, football 7, training week 1, B, meaning the second session of the week. You see ID. So what is the individual development? See the dual tasks up in the upper left there? There's the individual development. So we're going to work on scanning, basic skill, more complex language, perceive and conceive, but for the kids, just scan. And on the TO, the team organization, because we have that dual task, so we remind ourselves of our dual task, we're going to work on introducing the 1-3-2-1 structure, which is our preferred system of play, right from day one, week one, okay? And as we do, we have I won't go into the exercises in great detail, but the team organization, we're going to spend 10 minutes putting the kids in the structure with a goalie, 3 backs, 2 midfielders, 1, and we're just going to have them knock the ball around and throw in defenders versus 1, 2, 3, 4 defenders just in week 1 to show them the architecture, to plant that picture, I think that Paul says, the game model, if you will. I don't want to bastardize that term, but the vision of how we want to play collectively in our team organization. And then we want to go back into today's agenda of working on being great at visual exploration scanning. And each exercise in a typical TOVO session like this one would be, we would do a rondo, a 4v2. We would then move into what we call position play exercises. So that the distinction there is a rondo for us are perimeter players with internal defenders. Position play exercises are perimeter attackers, internal defenders, and the introduction of neutral jokers, comodines. I'm not sure what you call them where you come from, but you know what I mean, in yellow. So an internal middle of the fielder. I think you see where I'm going with that term, middle of the fielder. And then we play a training game. Now, if we talk about the time dedicated, the training game carries much more weight than the position play exercise, and the rondo is going to get us activated. What you'll notice is we don't have a warm-up, which is off the ball, because that would violate our own 3C checklist. They would not be developing cognition, competence, and character by doing a FIFA, I don't know what they call it, FIFA warm-up or any other warm-up. So on minute 1, a rondo. So now we have to check ourselves against our ideals. If we want to nurture players of cognition, competence, and character, and the exercises need to do so, well, does a rondo meet that checklist? Does a player have to perceive, conceive, decide, deceive, execute, and assess? In other words, scan, choose, do. Yes. Cognition, do they need to pass and receive the ball? Yes. Technical competencies, do they need to understand angles, distance, timing, lines, and situation? Yes. So that's under competencies in their understanding of position play elements for us. And do they need to compete and cooperate? Yes. Are there consequences for failure? Yes. Does the coach have to scream it out? No. Does the game self-regulate? Yes. Are we nurturing players who have a sense of will and identity and taking their own decisions? Yes. So you can see how simple that rondo is, but how far a cry is it from the line drill that I used to do that I threw in the trash bin, which did not accomplish all 3 C's. You go on to position play exercises. I think it's become evident now. Does it require a player to scan, choose, and do? Yes. Cognition, check. Does it require the competencies, both on both sides of the ball, attacking in 3s, defending in 3s, passing and receiving, angles, distance, timing, lines, situation? The principle number 1 of scanning well to find space to exploit. Yes. Great. Does it compete and cooperate? Do I have to as a player, or does a player have to compete and cooperate? Are there consequences for failure, in other words? Yes. So 3 C's, cognition, competence, and character. And then, of course, abundantly clear would be the training game. Any variation from 1v1 to 11v11, given these are 7-a-side teams, we would never go past the 7-a-side. So it would be 77 max in our training game portfolio. Again, cognitive development, competencies, and character. Yes, you're keeping score. You're competing and cooperating for the character. So as we've defined cognition, competence, and character with our players, our process and our promise to them is that every exercise in our portfolio, every day, all season, will demand that you be cognitively on, competently on, and character on. No off. And if you can't come to a session being on for whatever reason, personal problems, you don't feel well, you're ill, you got some social issues at home, school, any other priority, when you check into training from 7 to 27, you're going to be on for every minute of the session with the exception of water break. Now, it may not seem like a big difference, but I did this test with 5 different across the country's training sessions. On average, what I found to be in a 90-minute session, the average I found was players were on 27 minutes of a session, right, of 90. Now, granted, water breaks are going to be lost to whether it's TOVO style or not. But just imagine if a player goes out 90 minutes and less than a third or 2/3 they're off in some way, they're not developing their cognitive qualities, making, scanning, choosing, doing. Well, let's just say it wasn't that much. Just say it's even shy 30 minutes, which it wasn't, but let's just give the benefit of the doubt and say 30 minutes they're not on cognitively. 30 minutes for an older boy 3 times a day, or a girl 3 times a day, is an hour and a half a week when they're not thinking on the playing field. An hour and a half a week times 10 weeks, 30 weeks, 60 weeks, 3 seasons, 4 seasons. It adds up to over 2,000, we're talking about hours and weeks and months of lost time when a player is not on thinking, and by extension, not developing their capacity in real time, in context, to scan, choose, do. Now, 1 session, okay, but we're talking about a long-term development plan from 8 to 18. That's 10 years. That's thousands of hours of players who are not thinking, and then we want them to go on to college and think, or we want them to be ready for the pros and think. It's not fair to them, in my opinion. So this became abundantly clear to us that we wanted to make sure that every minute would be on the ball and on task, with the player demonstrating that they are scanning, that they are choosing, and that they are doing in context against competition. Just a choice we make, and I want to share the rationale for doing so. So let me just conclude, and I want to open up some questions. At the end of the day, it's not about TOVO for me. It's about, I think we share our why. You can choose other words. So I don't think that's really debatable. I think we all believe that we're in it for these children in our charge. So that's not really. The only thing we're going to debate is probably not why or for whom. I think the debate becomes how. TOVO is one and only one how, only one how. Don't want it to be the only how, obviously. And I don't want it to be dismissed as not significant how, because it has coherency, continuity, and it has clarity for a child. 3 things that all learners, whether they're in the classroom, in music class, dance class, or on your soccer field, need. Consistency, coherency, and continuity. That's how children develop. And we can say that our exercises on a daily basis, connected into a weekly basis, connected into a monthly or seasonal basis, connected to a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons, is going to nurture consistently, coherently, and continuously the cognition, competence, and character of a footballer. Does it make us correct? No, it makes us aligned with the player that we want to nurture. And to me, regardless whether it's TOVO or it's the Dutch system or it's the French model or whether it's Icelandic or Croatian or Czech or I don't know what else, Houston model, Dynamo model, players need that consistency, coherency, and clarity. And if it's executed with passion, there will be many flavors of training. We've just picked our flavor. We're Cruyffistas, if you will. We picked our flavor, and we want more than anything else to be aligned with our values, aligned with what we profess we're going to teach, and to assure that every exercise in our portfolio is aligned with that promise so that we can make that promise with clarity to the parents who entrust their children to us as coaches with the ultimate objective. And I do agree with Johan on this one. And here's some TOVO kids just 2 blocks from where I'm sitting now. On the beach here in Sitges, in between sessions, having some fun. I do agree with Johan. We must always seek joy. Maybe this is an absolute. We must always seek joy and inspiration in training as much as in competition. And I share that because if Johan had this philosophy at the upper echelons of global football and club football with what he accomplished at Barcelona, surely, if you're working in grassroots community around the Houston area, we have that same possibility to promote learning and joy and inspire the children. So I'll close with that and say consistency and clarity and coherency to develop players of cognition, competence, and character, in our case, means that we have a limited portfolio of exercises, but we're faithful to them because we believe it gets, I can't even speak my own, maximum rendimiento, maximum return on that time we have with our children, under the umbrella that each and every time we're together, individually and collectively, we will be finding and exploiting space. So I'll conclude with that, and I'll just stop here. We'll go to questions and answer. This is just a course that's coming up. I'll just mention to you because I'm touching upon like that introduction to a course that's going to come out in September. If you really love 7-a-side stuff and TOVO resonates with you, you can connect with us and Paul will, with Paul, and we'll get you the information. But more importantly today, I just wanted to get to your questions and answers, because I think in there we'll find some good dialogue. And again, I don't expect anybody to agree, but let's wrestle with any questions you have, and we can take them on one by one. So Paul, we'll come back to you. You have question and answer in your scroll there, Paul?
I would say we don't have any questions yet, but
where do they, in this format, this is Zoom, right? So would it be at the bottom of the screen, or is it under the chat or under the question and the Q&A?
It would be just in the chat is fine, or just open up the mic and go on.
Okay, yeah, or just open up the mic and go for it. Yeah.
Hi, Todd. Thanks for the presentation today. I guess in your training game, you spoke about how you don't really put rules or restrictions. The game itself is the teacher. But I guess in what I've seen, whenever we put goals down, it becomes very, they want to score, and we want them to score, but it can become very kind of transitional, right? And that's kind of opposite of positional play, where you want to teach them. And I guess how do you maybe not control it, but how do you coach that game, or so you want things to come out, obviously creating space and being able to maintain possession of the ball and then exploit at the right time?
Great question, Alan. Well, one, let me just back up, because it gets a little confusing with the language. I do and don't believe the game is the teacher. I think a game with an educator is the best powerful combination. So great. I think there's time for free play because my kids do it. I think there's time for training, and hopefully there's additional free play to complement what you're doing on the pitch. So I just want to clarify that. So when I look at a training game, what we look at is the objective is to score, right? So it's ultimately, how do you then find and exploit space? Because that's the language we're talking about with the kids. Now, if the defenders come and press, we don't have absolutes to say that we build up short and every pass is one touch, or every pass is two touch, or you never dribble, or you only dribble, right? So what we do is we can play with the dimensions so there's enough space to find, because in this case, they're young children. So we don't want the ball out of bounds every 2 seconds. And we don't want them to go home playing 0-0. They're 8 years old. I'd rather go home saying 6-6 and tell grandpa, I can't wait to go out mañana porque hemos marcado 3 goals. Fantástico. Adelante. Right? So I want that dynamic. I've seen this. I just say that because I laughed. I saw 30-minute training game and it was 0-0 with 8-year-olds. I'm like, using pug goals, 1 pug goal and 70. So I just say, what I want to do is say, they're the goals in a training game. Let's put the ball in the back of those goals. Hopefully that's more like 3-5-3 or something rather than a 0-0 match. But let's exploit the space that's given to us. And when you have a conversation with children about that, it may be a deeper ball because they're pressing high. Maybe not having that language, but we can as coaches. It may be that because they're covering wide, we play internal. It may be that the width is open, so we're going to dribble that into that space. So the relationship that we're working with kids is, how do you find and exploit space? And then you have a conversation about pass, receive, shoot, dribble, or head. And of course, we take heading away for the youngest kids. So it's a different relationship to say, oh, we're going to teach you to pass, and someday this will be useful. We're going to do shooting drills, and someday this will be useful, as opposed to saying, we're going to find and exploit space in this training game to keep score, yes, and to win. Yes, Alan, to win, that's okay, right? But we have to determine how we're going to find and exploit the space. Well, find the space by scanning. Have you taken in 360 degrees of information? Yes or no? Have you choose the best option to exploit space? Yes or no? And have you had the technical capacity by passing, dribbling, or shooting to exploit the space? So there you see the technique is a tool to accomplish an objective and not the sum of its own part. So in the training games, what usually happens, Alan, is this. Players will not, particularly young players, will not see any relationship between drills done prior to the game and the game itself. But can you blame them if they've come from drills that are passing in lines and then you're playing 3v3? There is no correlation. We have not done so. But as soon as the kids start to recognize that there is a rondo in that training game somewhere, there is a positional play advantage in that game. And all you need to do is find the rondo, execute it like you've done, or find the positional play relationships in triangles within the larger architecture of the 4v4, 5v5, 6v6, or 7v7 to exploit it, and then go ahead and put the ball in the back of the net. It changes the conversation. And I'm talking about from day one with 7-year-olds, right? It's a different way. You're here not to kick, not to shoot, not to receive a ball. You are here with us to find and exploit space. And passing and receiving and shooting are some ways to do that. It changes your departure platform from which your entire training curriculum takes shape. And it's a completely different platform from the, I'll teach you the technical components, and hopefully on the weekend, you'll figure out that it's actually an invasion game to find and exploit space. But by God, we haven't really trained it that way. We're just going to scream at you and expect that you would actually intuitively get that. And I take this from Doug Lemov, who's a wonderful educator. You know, you produce what you educate. So if we want players capable of finding and exploiting space in a complex, contextual, real-time environment, which is called the Saturday match, we better, as educators, have trained them in context to find and exploit space in cooperative and competitive environments, or otherwise we have not trained them for the team organization at all, except in our own minds, rationalizing individual and the collective in a way that is quite distinct. It's a great question. They will get it, but they won't get it on week 1, training session B. So play with those parameters, Alan, but always come back. I mean, I would say for us, if you're a TOVO coach, we always come back to what were we trying to accomplish? And did you make the choice? Not that I tell you the choice, but did you make a good choice to exploit the space? And then if they shoot wide or they shoot over, but they chose, great, right? And never, ever, especially with young players, never get on them for doing the right thing, but not having the right result, right? So I've seen, you know, a kid here was last year was taking a PK. He was 8 years old, was taking a PK. His dad stood up behind the goal and was screaming, "Kick it in the goal!" You know, like really pressure, right? You know that. And I'm thinking in my head, well, if he's selected for the PK, I'm pretty much sure he knows that he's supposed to kick it in the goal. That's one. I don't think screaming helps. And 2, it's your child's choice whether he goes left or right. And invariably, guess what happened? You know, pressure, dad screaming, skyrocketed. Then his dad screamed at him for not kicking in the goal, right? So I know that Houston parents would never tell their children what to do. Never, ever would parents scream and tell a child, pass, shoot, dribble, cover. When you do that, we're robbing the child of them reading in real time, in context, what they need to see, what they need to choose, and what they need to do. And that is most abundantly clear in the training games. And it won't be perfect, obviously, especially at the 7-a-side. So there's just mistakes galore, like everywhere else, right? If Raheem Sterling can miss what he missed a few weeks ago in front of the goal, then certainly a 7-year-old is given a little bit more liberty to have some failure as well. Thanks, Alan. Other questions?
Todd, how are you? So it's Romain from Pyramid Soccer. We've adopted a lot of the TOVO methods, and I wanted to ask you, looking at this training plan here, your focus is, principle 1, perceive and conceive. But are there times when you focus on, let's say, building from the back and then weave in multiple principles? How do you approach that?
It's a good question. We have, and I don't have a slide that goes into all, we have 14 principles of play. The first 3 have to do with managing oneself, which is basically scan, which is perceive and conceive. That's number 1. We just say scan with the kids. Decide and deceive, that's choose in kids' terms. And then execute and assess, and that's do. So I'm just using the scan, choose, do because they're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, and it can go in beyond that. But so those are the first 3 principles. Then we have other principles associated with attacking and defensive principles. So, but what I've learned from other educators is, while I know that in every one of these exercises, there are several principles, several position play elements, several technical qualities that need to be exhibited, I don't harp on all of them in a given session. I want to preload or preflect, we say here, on something that we want to improve, in this case, scanning, and then look for those kids doing that well, knowing, yeah, that there's several others. So to answer your question, we will tend to reduce it to an individual principle and then try to elicit and applaud that principle, knowing that there are plenty more to come over the course of a month or a season or several seasons. Does that answer your question? So I don't touch multiple themes in one session just because I'm trying to follow good, sound pedagogical practices, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that clarifies. Thanks.
It's really difficult for children to take in a lot of feedback with the other dynamics, social dynamics, and failure and success, and mentorship and guidance and critique. So what we try to do is say, when, for example, you're gonna have to scan in the run, though, scan the position play, and how do you do so? Okay, we give them tips, right? Head up, hips open, play to the far leg. But okay, I don't want to get into detail, but there you go, right? So as we do that in the run, though, we have to do that in position play exercise, and we have to do it in the training game. If we're gonna find the goal, and Alan made a good point, if we're gonna find the goal this way, right? But everybody's defending there, then maybe I have to go that way to open up the space, right? So having the posture is a very, to be able to scan is enough to keep them, focused on what we do. And then when a child does it well, and I just tweeted about this the other day, since I'm not regulating the exercise, in other words, the exercise going on, they don't need me to cheerlead, they don't need me to tell them the rules for 20 minutes. It's really quite self-explanatory once they learn it once. My job is to observe, and instead of, I was taught in my A license years ago, and granted it was a billion years ago, that a coaching point or freeze point, I'm not sure what the word was back then, maybe it was a coaching point or freeze point, was freeze, make a correction. A correction is predicated on an error. An error is predicated on failure. That sends a message to a child that when you stop as a coach, bad things are coming their way, right? And the psyche of a child, right? Particularly young children. I've changed that on its head. What I do now is I do the exact opposite. If I'm going to do a freeze point, it will be because somebody, he or she, scanned well with their hips open, their head up, found space to exploit because of great scanning, and then I'll have that girl or boy repeat it so that everybody can see exactly what she did well, have her do it again and play on. It may not seem much to us as coaches, but I have just frozen. And when a coach speaks now, it might be a good thing rather than, I hope it's not me. Maybe I hope it is me. And then I'm reinforcing the activity that I would like to see again, rather than trying to cut out the cancerous activity, right? And it just doesn't work. I want to reinforce. So there's a lot packed in here as to what the theme may be, how that plays out in every exercise consistently and coherently, and what my language is tied to my observation of catching them being brilliant. So as I said, it's a lot packed in there. I'm talking with UA, with the coaches. I just sit and watch, wait for it to happen, detail it, applaud it, and let them play. And then shut up. Yeah? All right, jump in. Anybody else, please?
Todd, I think you have a few questions in the chat.
Can I see that? Do I have access to that on my thing, Paul? Or can you read them, maybe one for me? Because I think you have control, Paul, of a chat or Q&A.
Let me read off a couple of these questions. How can we introduce rondos to U6 groups?
Aha, I love it. I prepared for this one. I told you, Paul, I'd get this question, okay? So here's the reasoning. Here's the logic. My kids can't do it, so I won't do it. And then what will you do instead? Well, I'm going to put them in lines and have them pass in lines, and then someday they'll be able to do it. That's a killer for me. That's a no-go for me. Because my child, who's American, happens to live in Catalonia, and at 6, they did this. So he has been thinking since 6. And so I always say to coaches of the United States, when would you think that they will be good enough to think and do? Is it at 7, 8, or 9? And if it's 9, they're 3 years behind the Catalan child, which is probably why we're like 30 million years behind the Spanish national team, right? Because that becomes cumulative lapse, and kids don't catch up. They just don't. As best as our best is, with all due credit to Michael Bradley, I think there's 20 or 30 Spanish midfielders that have grown up doing this since 6 years old. And I don't know that Michael did or not. It's not about Michael. It's about our best is not good enough relative to the world's best. And I'm going to suggest because we don't give our kids enough credit at younger ages when they can't do something, it doesn't mean we stop. It means that we help them do it. Okay. So here's a simple answer. 6 years old. And I know this because I did this literally. I'm looking down the beach here to the stadium down the road. I did this with girls in Catalonia that had never played football before. I was their first experience, and I volunteered to help the club, and I had 6-year-old girls. A lot of these girls went to school with my 6-year-old son at the time, and we did this exercise. So I had a 4v1, 6-year-old girls, never played the game before, couldn't pass to save their lives. Same thing you'd find anywhere in the world, right? But if by creating that internal, I called it the, I'm trying to think in English, the lion's den, because I was coaching in Spanish. So I created this internal den by putting cones down. So you see where the red defender is. That red defender became a lion. And then Maria Antonia was on the ball at the bottom of your screen, and that was her name. Sophia was on the right of the screen, okay? And I can't remember the girl's name on the left. I think it was Tali on the left-hand side of the screen. And I said to Maria, okay, she can't pass, she can't play, I get it, okay? But I don't want to take out the cognitive element that she's choosing, that she's the master or the mistress of her own destiny, whatever the right term may be. She's the master of her own destiny, right? So I said, the lion's in the den. The lion cannot leave the den, so you're safe. Can't come bite you, right? No te puede morder. So, tranquila. No problem. Let's stop for a second. What do you see? I see the lion. Okay, so do you want to play it? No. Where do you want to play the ball? I'm literally talking as if I was talking to a 6-year-old. I said, Maria Antonia, ¿dónde quieres, where do you want to play the ball? And she said, looking left and right. So she's already scanning. She's already making a choice based upon the lion, right? She's scanning, choosing, and now she has to make a decision and do it. And so she goes with her little finger, she goes that way to Sophia. And I said, do it. And she did it terribly at first, but she did it. But the lion can't get out, so the lion can't steal the ball. Sophia got it, and then she had the same choice, and then I didn't stop it every time. I said, keep going. And then when the lion got it, it was a big deal. The lion had him roar and had some fun. She got it, she had to go out, and then maybe Maria Antonia went in the middle, and she was the lion. But then a lot of the girls wanted to be lions, so I had to compensate for the fact that they actually preferred to be the lion, and I didn't want them to lose possession on purpose, but that's another story. So the idea is, I could have very easily convinced myself, new players never played the game, can't pass to save their lives, so let me simplify it and take cognitive processing out of it. No, I just handicapped the defender, but maintain cognition, competence in the character, outplay the lion, do so with a pass that you choose, cognition, competence, and character, and they did it. And then, as I said about the last reference with the games, I played 3v3, but they played to 3 attacking goals and 3 defensive goals, and it was like 7-6. And then the next day at the school, when I picked up my son, Sophia's mom came out and said, what did you do at training yesterday? And I was like, oh no, I've forever put them into, therapy for never wanting to play football. She said, she came home to her grandfather and said that she scored 4 goals. She cannot wait until Friday. And I'm like, I don't know, whatever else I've done, that was a success. Sophia came back because she was successful. And you and I know she is horrible at football, but not for a 6-year-old who's never played the game. So I never sacrificed the cognitive development of a child for the false impression I will have that they're better and in control because I've set up nice orderly cones to have them be successful and told them how to be successful. Fair enough? All right, Paul, next one. Let's fire away.
You're on mute, Paul.
Got it. Sorry. Carlos from South Texas. Todd, in holistic training, most likely the objective is to work all 6 structures. How do you train the coordinative structure and the conditional?
So you'll have to, I need some help on the 6 structures because I obviously don't know them by name. Maybe I'm missing the referring.
Do you know Paco Cerullo? Carlos.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Paco. Okay, so Barcelona's the way that Barcelona, socio, et cetera, socio-cognitive, et cetera. Okay, so it's just a different framework. what's interesting is if you talk about, and I'm going to get the terms wrong because they're Spanish and then if you just talk about in general terms, a lot of the English, you're talking about, okay, the socio-cognitive, you're talking about relationships, you're talking about the psychology between player, coach, teammates, components, you're talking about technical development, whatever term you want to use for that in Spanish or Catalan English. You're talking also about the cognitive development of a child, the decision-making elements. You're talking about the character development, as we say, but they can be of, PhD terms. So, and you're talking about the physical development as well when you talk about conditioning or movement, mobility, stability, or dual force. So all of those are in there. Maybe the language changes. But what I would say to you, when you go back to a typical session for us, it's very much because it's based upon Johan, and Paco has taken the time to perfect it for Barcelona's modern day, is in each of these exercises, we speak of cognitive development, we speak of competencies, and we speak of the character. When you talk about the physical development or the physiological and then the technical development, we make sure that every exercise requires the technical precision to be successful with consequences for failure. And we talk about the fitness. Now, for 7, 8, and 9-year-olds, it's not out of the question, because we've done it, that you don't start with the training game. Why? Because they do not need, you can jump into a physical load that you cannot jump into when you're dealing with hormonal growth development or post-growth players. So on the physical development, each of these exercises for us has always has a cognitive load, and it becomes more complex, and it has a physical load that becomes more complex, more demanding. I shouldn't say complex, more demanding, right? So a rondo is the least, it still has a cognitive load, but it's cognitively less demanding than a position play exercise and less demanding. So the cognitive load increases over time through the training session, with the bulk of the training session being a training game. With younger kids, you can start with the training game because you can dismiss the physical load in terms of injury, because it's really hard to screw up a 7-year-old. They could probably come out of the Minnesota freezer and still be okay. Okay, but this structure also affords us the possibility to go into that growth phase and post-growth phase, whereby we can activate the physical load with minimal load at the rondo, minor load at the position play, and my movement specialists really get the clock going in the training game and will tell us which training game we can do at which portion of the week for how many minutes, because we're dealing with elite athletes and we're dealing with a particular competition schedule that's going to require pretty sophisticated periodization. But for the younger kids, as I'm talking about today, by these exercises, you're getting in pretty much all of Paco's language and all of our language broken down to cover the physio, the psychological, the emotional, the cooperative, and the competitive, and the technical, and the cognitive, all in each exercise. I just don't frame it in the same 6 Catalan terms that Paco does. But I understand where he's going and respect this. To be fair, my son has trained at Barcelona. My older son was there for a few years. Obviously, it's kind of in our blood a little bit. My younger sons have been there training at Barcelona. You could take, I can tell you why, because Oscar and I put this together. Oscar is my colleague. He was the under 10 coach for 9 years at Barcelona. This is a Barcelona training session. This is exactly what my son did. And then the coaches would labor that, covering all 6, spheres or buckets or parcels or whatever you want to call it. This is literally, I'm looking at it now. It was 4v3 plus 2 because the kids had been training a while and a little bit more sophisticated. But and it was a little bit. They had the goalies in instead of having the small goals. This foundation is Johan Cruyff, cognition, comps, and character, in any terms you want to call it. 3 buckets, 6 buckets. And this was the session with minor adjustments that Oscar would run. Oscar at Barcelona, I think the best team in the world for his age group, undefeated for a couple of years, fantastic, playing the best of the best at that age group. He has a portfolio of about 12 exercises, to give you an idea, that he would use through the entire season. And he would be here to tell you, because we've talked about it, he tells to anybody who listen, the one thing that he believed would be the most important would be to pass on a player in condition. That means to under 12 coach at La Masia, at Barcelona Academy. And the main objective was that the player could scan. One main objective. Yeah, you can get to width and depth and attacking in threes and defending in threes. But the main objective was to deliver a player in condition through a series of 12 principal core exercises, not 1,000, 12, for an entire season, to prepare them for the team organization, to take care of their individual development, and to pass them on in conditions to compete at the under 12 level. 12. If I compare that with your average coach in the United States, I bet you the average coach in the United States has a portfolio of more than 100 exercises that they do. And yet at Barcelona, he's got 12. It's just something to prompt a little consideration as to how you accomplish the terms we use as coaches to develop their rendimiento, to develop their selves holistically. Paul, got another one for me?
No other questions right now. Let's see.
So
Oh,
Paul,
we got one.
oh, you do.
How do you like to incorporate goalkeepers into your session? Good one.
Great question. So typically, I mean, again, I understand that many of you don't have this luxury. So that being said, let me just say how I would do it. What we would do is typically is keepers for the rondo, keeper with doing keeper, specialized keeper work when it involves the hands and goal that you need to for the position play exercise, and bring them back for the training game. That would be typical. Having said that, you might not have an assistant coach. I do not think it's bad for keepers to be in all of these exercises, given the modern responsibilities of keeper, which is basically almost like a sweeper keeper of the old days, right? But typically we would rondo for the activation, go to do some specialized work, because I'm not a goalkeeper coach, with the goalkeeper coach, and bring them back to the training game and have them play in the training game. That's how we would do it. But I have the luxury of having somebody to work with keepers. So I don't know if that helps or hurts. At 8 years old, I don't even think it's necessarily bad that several kids play keeper. I don't think it's bad to rotate positions. I don't think it's bad that they're in every session all the time, and they may raise their hand and say, I want to play keeper. Well, if there's gloves, put them on. They may just love the gloves and the jersey. I don't know. But let them play, and then instead of using just small goals all the time, play with big goals or medium-sized goals, or have them defend 2 goals and put them wider. So they have to be, they can use their hands, but they have to be behind. So there's all sorts of creative ways, if you don't have the luxury of a goalkeeper coach like we would, to get them involved in a game that develops their capacity to do what's on this screen, which we say scan, choose, do, with a player that also gets the specialized treatment of being able to learn how to use their hands appropriately in front of the big goal. Great question. I'm going to just share this with you, Paul, because it's a question, and if there's others, please, I can take them. But and then Paul, I'll give it back to you, and I know you can conclude as a group. When I say scan, choose, do, that's the language we use with kids. The scanning is perception and conception. The choosing is decision and deception. The scanning and the choosing, we ask kids to do before they get the ball. If there's one thing I notice, the difference between American players, not just American, because we have New Zealand and Australian, let's say non-European players, and kids that were born here or play here since young ages, is kids that I find that come from the States to us, they start this process once they've received the ball. They get the ball, then they scan, look for their options, make a choice, and execute. And we say it has to be antes que ayer. It has to be before yesterday that you did that. You have to come into space having scanned. By the time you touch the ball, you have already made a decision. So that means you've had to scan and choose before you touch the ball. And by extension, you execute that decision with your first touch. You're going to take it away from pressure. You're going to bump it with a one touch. You're going to touch it into a dribble. You're going to do a one-shot pass. You're going to protect it and wait for players to get in space. So we teach players to scan with those tips in every exercise, from rondo, position play exercise, and training game. Because to me, that visual exploratory, and there's more research coming out from Kier Jordet after an exhaustive study with Arsenal. I think his research will probably be out very soon on just how much return on the investment of teaching kids to scan you get. It's up to almost 20% in the EPL difference between players who have great visual exploration, like a Xavi or maybe a Frank Lampard, as opposed to one in terms of their percentage of passes completed. I'm not sure there's anything else you can teach a kid that would give them that much return on the investment, and particularly when scanning or visual exploration can be done by any child, by any gender, race, creed, or color, at any size. So it's not like you need any physical advantage to scan. And in fact, Johan would believe many of your smaller players are better at scanning, because if they don't, they are physically punished, which is why you see a lot of the Europeans' best midfielders are not over 5'10". And some of the best players in the world who ever played the game, like a Leo Messi, never even came close to that, really. So scanning is about having your head up, hips open, and far leg. We teach that to 6-year-olds and to 26-year-olds alike. Having your hips open to your options before you receive the ball, playing to the far leg because that helps you keep your hips open. The tips for choosing to identify these elements before, which is to identify the space. The space will be determined by the ball, the opponents, the teammates, obviously. So there's that relationship between the space in that graph there. And then you just execute and do. And what we tell the players is, when you've made your choice, I don't care if it's 6 with Maria Antonia or Sofia, or my boy Jordan at 13, or Raheem Sterling at however old he is now. When you made your choice, you execute it 100%. Never second guess. We always say to kids, it's your choice, so it's the correct choice. Later, we can say, you tend to do this, so let's start to think about how other choices may be better in your portfolio. And that's when we make a relationship very powerfully between the technical precision and capacity of a player. Because a player will not choose an option that they cannot technically execute. So they limit their choices because they are limited by their technical arsenal. So they will not take that left-footed shot. Even Suarez, dribbling down the left side of the goal, tends to cut it back to his right foot, and he's one of the best players. It's not the best choice. It's the choice that he feels most comfortable because of his technical limitations as a player, even at the highest levels. But if we can work with the player and say, the game requires a certain action that you see, that you can execute, do it, and do it with your left foot. And I'll conclude with this story, just because it's an inspirational one. There's a boy named Jack Jasinski who came to us for a couple times, for several terms here at TOVO Academy. We took him to Paul Holliker, this guy that was crazy guy out west that was coaching back then at a place called the Earthquakes, you know, some team out there. And I took Paul, this boy, and Paul was gracious enough to trust me to give him a trial with Jay. Well, not trial, a guest training with Trey, a professional courtesy with Jay Gomez, wonderful coach. And Jack had been trained in this. He ended up choosing Philadelphia. And even then I was skeptical whether the crew there would see what we saw, what we loved about him in Catalunya. In Catalunya, he'd be a highly prized player, maybe not so much in the state. I was a little worried. Fast forward 2 years. He was at 17 years old. He's man of the match against the Red Bulls in the Philadelphia Union 2. I don't know if that's their name, but you know what I mean, the USL branch. And he did exactly what he would not do at TOVO until pressed upon to do so. And you can look it up. It was USL, Philly Union 2, if that's their name, I'm not sure, versus I think it was Red Bull. Man of the match, Jack Jasinski. Second goal, third goal, game-winning goal. He looked for space that was available to him because a midfield had come out and pressed. So he found space in behind. He received a ball on his run into space with now a central defender trying to track him down at an angle from behind. And most players would cut it back to what is his strong foot, his right foot. He had heard me tell him, I don't know how many times at training, the game requires a technical action, and you have to be able to meet that technical action. And he took a shot with his left foot, near post and low, and scored the game winner. An action that he never would have done because he would have hid from the weakness. And so when we start with children at 7 years old, they're all weak and they're all strong. They're all 7-year-olds. And if we encourage them to scan, choose by their own volition, and do what they think is best, over time, we can show them the best choices have the best results and require the best technical capacity so that your options are boundless as a player. And if we get to that, I'm sure that Paul is going to be knocking on your door, asking for a few players to come to that wonderful academy he moved to from San Jose. So I'll end with that inspirational story because I know you won't believe me that it starts at 7. If there's anything message I can send back home, and you are back home for me, even though I can say I'm a New England person, so you may not let me back into Texas again, but you Texas people have your own rules, I get it, is this. Never underestimate a child's capacity to learn, not to do right now. Not Maria Antonia, not Sophia, but I did not want to underestimate Maria Antonia's capacity to scan, choose, and do, and have the courage to do so, knowing that failure would be prominent and prevalent over time. And as long as I supported that process and credited her with that intelligence that's innate, I could become an educator. Now, the root of education is educare, to bring out or to bring forth something within your students or players. And if you believe that they are capable, the only difference between failure and success is your guidance and mentorship and support. And I would encourage you, let's not dummy down 6, 7, 8-year-old training because they're not doing it in Catalonia. They're just expecting children in due time to take on a greater cognitive load, a greater physical load, and a greater demand of their character to compete, win, lose, or draw, with or without screaming parents, because they scream here, and shake hands after the game. That's my message. Coherency, consistency, and continuity with you being educators, recognizing the dual task you have. Team organization and individual development, and not sacrificing one for the other because your short-term wins in team organization could prejudice a child's individual development, and particularly when they get into the growth phase. And if I want to win on a team organization, I take January borns, 13-year-olds that are 5'10" instead of 4'10", and I accomplish my team objective at the expense of those other players who could have contributed to that team, maybe not in the same physical nature, but certainly in the same cognitive nature and grown up. And I'll give you 2 examples just to give you some inspiration to give those little guys a chance and girls a chance. And that's this. Dennis Bergkamp twice was going to be sent away from Ajax, and Johan Cruyff saved him. And he was going to be sent away because he was a little too pale, like he's a little too, scrawny, right? His parents wanted him to study, so he had to go to school. So he wasn't 100% committed. Ridiculous, but that was the Ajax material. And Johan said, and he was small, so he couldn't win a physical battle to save his life. And Johan's words were this: look at the boy's feet and look at the boy's brain, how he plays football. When he grows, he's going to have both the technique and the intelligence to play the game. And I think history speaks pretty well for what Dennis was allowed to accomplish. So I'll conclude there. Paul, let me just say, because it's 5:12 and I'm going up to Barcelona now for training, so I really appreciate you getting me on early. To everybody else, thank you very much. I had to do some agenda with my boys' medical staff and my wife and I playing home to 6 kids running every day. So I appreciate waking up on Labor Day. Paul, as always, thanks for the invitation. For those of you around Paul, I want to take the time to say, Paul, what Paul is doing is unprecedented. Really, Paul and Tom and all that are involved with the organization in and around Houston, to look at football holistically in community terms, to engage schools and grassroots club from the humble to the most accomplished, whatever that means at 7 years old, okay, and bring you together in dialogues and conversations that will prompt conversations to hone your craft for the benefit of your children, to do so in some cases at no cost for the children through the schools, to have Tom Byer come in and to introduce that at the youngest with the parents. It's really unprecedented in the United States and maybe even globally. So I have nothing but applause and admiration for Tom, Paul, the staff on Houston, and this is just one example. And just to be invited for me, Paul, as you know, is always an honor. It's a little bit of bean babble mixed in with TOVO. I hope I prompted some thought. Don't swallow it whole. Wrestle with it, and if anything resonates with you, come back and connect with us. And if you want to throw anything I've said in the trash, that will only mean that your convictions and your current methodology must be so wonderfully strong and powerful that you'll deliver it with passion, which is what you will do best anyway. So really appreciate it. I'll sign off and let Paul conclude with you, but thank you very much. I'm off to training, guys. Be well.
Thank you, Todd.
Cheers, Paul. Thanks again.
Awesome.
Adios, everybody. Adios. Adios. Nos vemos en Cataluña. Ciao.
Thank you.
Well, that was fantastic. I know there's a couple other questions there, but you know, it is every time I listen to Todd, you know, again, he really puts a clarity into it that few people have, and I think that's really what makes the best teachers. You know, there's a lot in there that I wrote down in my notes, but maybe there's some things in there you guys wanted to touch base on, talk a little bit more about.
So Paul, are you cool if I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, from an educator, that was awesome, by the way. You know, I'm so jacked up listening to that. But, and for those of you who don't know, I was an old teammate of Paul's at one point in time, way back in the day. But Paul, from an educator, coach to coach standpoint, right? Like, talk, like, what do you do, like, and what's your wisdom and experience have been? He used the Maya Angelou quote of like, do better until you know, or do the best you can until, you know, and then once you know, do better. What do you do when I know you're in a position of power, but what's your conversation with other coaches trying to enlighten or awaken them to this, you know, philosophy of football? And like, what's the response, or what are some of the techniques or tools you use when they say, I think you're way, like, earlier in your life, right? Like when you weren't in a position of power, or they say, I think you're way overthinking this, you know, just roll the balls, let them play, you know, like we need more tabs, like how he was, when he was on the ball, like we aren't going to create that if we give them these, you know, restrictions, and just let them play, you know, they're 10, 11, 12 years old. What are some of the tools and techniques you use to try to enlighten and get them to see it differently?
Yeah.
Without offending egos and everything, the politics? Is that?
Well, I think one thing that Todd touched upon there was survivorship bias, which is, you know, listen, you know, I won a national championship at Santa Clara. We didn't lose a game, right? That must have been an amazing football that we played. And I know what to do, and I'm going to continue to do that. So I think survivorship bias is one thing. And, you know, like Todd just said it there at the very end, if you are so passionate about your way, right, and this doesn't, you know, resonate with you, then you're going to coach it passionately. But for me, what it was exposure. So I was exposed to Barcelona in 2006. So I had always kind of seen it from a distance, Ajax, Cruyff, all this stuff. And I kind of, you know, we're just getting little snippets of it. There wasn't anything like now we have on social media or this kind of stuff we're doing. But when I went to Barcelona and I literally saw my first positional game, I was blown away. And I didn't know the name of it. I didn't know what it was, because when I played, and Steve, we talked about this briefly, is, you know, we played a possession game. You know, I ran all over the field and it was just about keeping the ball, right? But the position game is completely different, right? He's trying to build that pattern recognition, that consistency, and I saw that, and I knew it was something. So I started to take notes, and then I went back again. So I guess I was exposed to it, which I think everyone here is now exposed to something here, right? Maybe they've been exposed to it a few times, and then you start to discover it, and then you start to, hey, I like this, and this is what I want to do. I went back to Cal Poly in 2000. I went back to Barcelona again in 2009 and brought this training method back to Cal Poly, and it completely changed how I coached a team. I mean, I had coached very successfully, got to a national championship, the whole thing, and I threw out everything that I did, threw it aside, And I started to do the rondos, the positional games, the training games. And I started to look into positional games. So thank God for me, I didn't have survivorship bias. I knew I saw something, I saw a different level for me. And I wanted to get a hold of it, and I wanted to study it, and I wanted to experiment it. And what resonates with me is, you know, everything in there just is, I'm aligned with, you know, and they're all building blocks. So now, you know, I went through this process where I'm introducing rondos, I'm introducing position game, introducing these methods. But then you look at what he talked about, scanning. And now people over the world are recognizing that how important is this scanning element? Well, it's as important as any, probably more important than any aspect in the game. So when do you start that development? You can start right away. So what are some methods to do it? So when you look at it critically, yeah, you look at you can go back in some of your exercises and go, man, there's better exercises I can do, right? And so it makes a lot of sense, daily, weekly, monthly. Another big thing that is important is I think every single club out there, every single club that we have out there that's on the call today has professional players in it, has high-level players in it. They don't look like it right now, but it takes about 10 years of really consistent development for these players to emerge. Now imagine if you're in a club where you don't have a philosophy in your club that's consistent. So now you have your one coach at U10 that's grabbed onto some of these methods, but then at U11, it's a different guy. And then it's a different method, the next one, different. So now there's breaks in the chain of that high level development. And that for me is where our country can really improve. And that's why it's so important as a club to have that consistency, that coherence, you know, that Todd's talking about. There's just so much in there. There's so much magic inside that presentation.
Yep. Thank you.
Sorry, I went off there.
No, yeah, thank you.
So, I mean, a lot of times it's just getting exposed to it, and people got to be open to it. And if they're not open to it, it's no problem, you know. You know, for me, it's like when I see a training session now, and I see moments where they're not getting this kind of holistic development, I just feel like it's wasted time for the player. But then also you have to be okay and patient with yourself, because I never know the plans of the coach. The coach could have a plan over 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And so you never judge on a training session, but this is such a simple and understandable way to train. And it's not about creating a million exercises for me, you know. It's about creating methods that you can really dive deep into, right? And see the improvements. The other thing I would say is watching film is very important. If you ever have the ability to film your young players, even, you know, I know some guys on this call do it. You know, they're filming their training games or whatever else. It's a great teaching tool. And then you can start to teach your players and show your players at whatever age, like Todd said, you know, the exploitation of space, finding space, another great tool. Adriano, how about you?
Hi, Paul. Thank you. It was a really good chatting and really good presentation. I appreciate you to put this together. No, I totally agree with this philosophy, and I mean, we've been doing that at Cavalry for the last couple of years. We're starting from the youth academy, and we really force our 5, 6, 7 years old kids to work on this philosophy, and we gotta be patient. You know, well, hopefully we'll see the results in a few years for sure. But I totally agree on this vision and on this philosophy, and you know, we discussed a few times about that, and I think we will see results not just for our club, but for the Houston area, and possibly for for the United States in the next few years. We got to be ready for 2026 fall, right?
Yeah. Oh, I think you touched upon a great thing. It's patience, 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 because everybody wants to win the game on the weekend, right? And it's so easy to get caught into, you know, a results-oriented mindset. We all want to win, but I guarantee you that if you stick with this way of playing, the players are going to develop, and you're gonna win, right? That's part of it, and you're gonna learn. But in today's fast-paced world, you know, and I think it's important that we become developmental coaches, and that patience is crucial. We got to remind ourselves of that. You know, it doesn't mean that we're patient and we're not teaching. You know, we're constantly teaching, we're constantly refining, we're constantly painting pictures for our players. I'm looking at like how many pictures did Xavi probably have painted for him growing up, U10 through U18. He probably played, you know, thousands of rondos, thousands of position games. He probably had a coach come up to him on the shoulder and say, listen, you know, what did you see in this situation? This player was here, this player, what did you see? That was a big thing I got from Barcelona when I went there. They always asked the player when they made a mistake, they asked them, they didn't get on him about the mistake. They asked him, what did you see? Because they wanted to test and they wanted to find out what the player was actually seeing, why they made that choice. And it just kind of reinforced, again, you know, what Todd was saying again is the scanning and seeing the game. So Xavi was probably put into, you know, millions of those situations over his 10-year period, right? And you know, it's not that he was an exceptional athlete. He was an exceptional decision maker and technician and all that, but it started when he was very, very young, you know? And then, you know, he's every single one of those exercises, the rondo, the position game, the training game. I mean, I look at it and I go, man, if I was a player, I would have loved that. I mean, that's the perfect training, man. I'm on the ball right from the beginning. I'm not in a line. I was so impatient as a kid. I was so ready to play the game, like right away, right? And I would get in and I understood I understood, you know, getting in a line and doing situations, and I loved them because I love soccer. But imagine going to a training session and all of a sudden it's keeping the ball from somebody, right? And you're moving, and then you're in a position game and it's bigger and it's a little bit more complex, and then you're playing a game. I'd do that, you know, with a good teacher. I would love to do that, you know. And I think it, you know, it's proven that it develops players at an exceptional level. I saw one of the questions on there was in the chat was about, let me read it because it's a great question. How about developing players to take those 1v1s that help in creating space by taking their defenders successfully by dribbling past them? This is a great question, and Todd didn't get to it, but I love this question because you also want to create, you know, these creative, dynamic players. Messi, when he was a young kid, you know, he was dribbling 3-4 guys, right, around the field, right? And he's creating this difference maker. And I think you can still do that. I think that natural talents type of stuff comes out, especially in these types of training methods. Because in these types of training methods, you are finding spaces way more than you are in maybe different training methods. So that exceptional kid or that kid that likes to dribble, he's being put into more situations that are conducive to high-level dribbling actions. So I think it makes sense for all players, you know. Anyways, just thoughts. I'm sure Todd would answer it much better and in a different way. But anything else, guys? That was a great partners right there.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah.
Want to touch back on that video. How much video for, say, U11, U12 teams should they be watching? Or is there a minimum amount? Is there a maximum? I know growing up, when I was able to watch the video and come back and my dad would be like, hey, you see this right here? This is where you can exploit this. It was very, it was very, a good learning, right? I mean, I had opportunity to go, oh, okay, now I see it, right? And I don't think we do that. I think it's important that as a club we would do that. And is there a minimum amount or a maximum amount that we should utilize, or as much as they can stomach? What is that?
I think as much as you can, as much as, is it once a month? Is it a few times a month, right? Just to break down some film for a young player, and to show them, go over the game. I mean, we all have the ability to do the Zoom, right? And now one thing I really think is important is a tactical board at practice. So a tactical board, like see, Romain has one behind him there, right? And the kids are all very, very visual learners. I don't know how many kids aren't visual learners, but having a tactical board at practice and showing them kind of the width and the depth and playing in between the lines. Kids can get that. You could talk to them, but in between a break and you show them that, I think that's a mini film, right? Hey, you were positioned here next to the player here and you have the magnet there, right? But what about if you took this position, and what if you orientated your body in this way? And then you start asking the questions, right? Just like he said for that little girl, right? So whenever I watch film, I become a better coach. That's all I know. And I don't watch enough film. I need to watch more and more and more film. So if you can film your U10 game, you can film your U11 game, and then you figure out, hey, this is where I can show little Bobby, he can get wider, he can play higher, he can drop deeper, and why, and then I can explain that to him. That will go so far, right? And then you're consistent with that type of teaching. I think players really they respond to that so well.
Thank you.
Well, guys, I have that presentation recorded, so I can definitely provide that to the clubs as needed. Gareth, would you like to say anything on your end? Is Gareth still there?
No, I'm here. Yeah, Paul. I thought it was good. It's always interesting to listen to Todd, and I think some of the things he talks about falls in line with some of the things that are being discussed in grassroots coaching education courses here in the United States. The importance of the ball moving and players making decisions, and the training sessions being game-like, where they're having to experience the 4 moments of the game and make decisions based off of that. So I encourage people to keep doing that, and I think a lot of you guys are buying into the philosophy that Paul's teaching and that's being asked of coaches to implement in players while they're running training sessions. So I thought it was really good, always interesting and adds value. So thank you for putting it on.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. All right, you guys. Well, thank you so much. Like I said, this has been recorded, so reach out if you'd like me to send it out to your club or whatnot, or maybe we'll put it somewhere. But yeah, have a great week ahead, and we'll see you hopefully next month.
Thanks a lot, Paul.
Stay safe out there.
Thanks, Paul.
Yep.
Thank you, guys.
All right, take care, guys.
Thank you.